On the Business Courier front page centerpiece this week, we've been looking at the Brent Spence Bridge project all wrong. The Business Courier explored the question, is it time for a new idea for the Brent Spence Bridge? The Courier looked at financial details and found the $2.6 billion plan to replace the bridge is actually an 8-mile highway widening and interchange replacement plan. Fixing the functionally obsolete bridge and building a new one to its immediate west would actually cost about $700 million. The Ohio Department of Transportation and the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet are digging into the details, and their plan for cost savings is due on Tuesday. The result could lead to a smaller, cheaper project, one that could be financed with less expensive tolls and finally get on the road. Business Courier reporter Chris Wetterick reported this story and joins editor Rob Dawmeyer in the studio to talk about if there really is a better way to get that bridge done. Guys.
Thanks very much, Peg, and Chris, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Obviously a lot of talk, not a lot of action on the Brent Spence, but any kind of action that did happen seemed to happen on the Kentucky side of the river this year. What went on in Frankfort during the most recent session for the legislation down there?
Well, what they need to do in Kentucky, they want to pay for this bridge by having a private company come in and build it and then basically pay them back via tolls. That's probably an oversimplification of the process, but that's basically what they need to do. The Kentucky House passed that legislation. The Kentucky Senate did not, and so that's where the failure was down in Frankfort this year. They didn't really pass it because not necessarily because of tolls, but because of the potential for tolls, but because there were some problems with cities and counties in Kentucky being on board with the legislation. They wanted to be able to do public-private partnerships as they would do with this bridge, and that aspect of the legislation wasn't in there. So it was just not a priority in the closing days of the legislative session last week in Frankfurt.
So the two state departments of transportation that are involved, obviously Ohio and Kentucky, what's been their role? What are they doing right now?
Well, they're taking a deep dive into the construction costs of the project. You got to remember, this is almost an 8-mile project, not just replacing the bridge or not just fixing the current bridge and putting another one right next to it, but doing 8 miles of highway reconstruction and widening, as well as doing some interchange work at each aspect of the project. So they're taking a look at that. They're saying, okay, what do we need? What do we don't need? What do we not need? We're not sure kind of where they're going to come out on that.
So something that I think is really the reason you wrote the story, and I think is great about the story, is this idea that, everybody needs to remember that this $2.6 billion project isn't just about the bridge. It's almost 8 miles of freeway. What are some of the people that say those 8 miles have to be redone as well? What's their argument? Why can't we just focus on the bridge?
Well, they argue that there's too much congestion on the bridge, and that will, if you only do a bridge project, that won't solve the congestion problems leading up to it. The critics of that say basically that the traffic numbers that ODOT and the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments have put out, they show that traffic isn't really increasing on the bridge and hasn't increased. In fact, it's decreased depending on how you look at it. So, they feel that the project is overblown, and so that's what the Departments of Transportation are looking at. You've kind of had a degree of, of looking at that, like the Kentucky transportation officials, when this first came up in January, they kind of said, well, we don't really think there's a lot to cut. We're going to do what the governors say, but we don't think there's a lot that we should take out. Recently, though, the folks in Ohio have said, well, maybe the low-hanging fruit here is to take out one of the lane expansions and see if that reduces the cost. So it's going to be interesting this week or next week to see what they actually say.
And we'll keep our eyes on that. Thanks very much for being here.
Thanks.